I could not breathe. My throat felt like it was closing. My chest was heavy, and my skin was burning with red hives. I had eaten at home with my family just an hour before, and I knew it had to be the peanuts hidden in the sauce. I was allergic. I had told them 100 times, but no one cared to listen. I was on the floor of the living room, clutching at my neck, gasping for air. My vision blurred as I reached out a hand toward my mother. "Please, call 911, I begged, my voice cracked and broken. But she didn't move. She wasn't even looking at me. She was bent over Max, my brother's golden retriever, who had a tiny cut on his paw. Blood, barely a drop, spotted the white tiles, and she was panicking like the world was ending. "Stay calm, Maxie. Mommy's here," she whispered to the dog, stroking his fur like he was the one fighting for his life. My brother knelt beside her, glaring at me like I was being dramatic. "You'll be fine, Emily." "Stop making a scene," he muttered, his full attention on the dog. I clawed at the carpet, trying to drag myself closer to them. My chest wheezed. "Hospital. Now, please." But my father joined them, crouching over Max Richard. "Bring me the bandages," my mother shouted, and Dad rushed to the kitchen. They were all huddled over a dog's paw while I choked alone. Tears stung my eyes, not only from the allergic reaction, but from the cold truth. That hit me harder than any sickness could. They chose the dog over me. I tried to scream, but only a weak hiss came out. My body grew heavy, the room spinning, their voices fading behind me. I thought, in that final dark blur, that I was going to die on that floor, abandoned by my own parents for a dog. When I opened my eyes, the sharp smell of disinfectant stung my nose. White lights blinded me. I was lying in a hospital bed, an oxygen tube in my nose. My arm hooked to and forth, my chest rose, and fell easier now. But every breath reminded me of how close I had come to not waking up at all. A nurse noticed me stirring. "You're lucky, sweetheart," she said softly. "Your neighbor found you just in time. Another 10 minutes and—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I blinked, trying to piece it together. My neighbor, not my parents, not my brother. Mrs. Carter, the woman who lived across the street, had found me on the floor and called for help. I croaked out. "My parents, did they come?" The nurse's eyes flickered with pity. "No, honey, nobody came. You've been here overnight." I turned my head and saw my phone on the table. No messages, no missed calls, no worried texts asking if I was okay. Nothing. It was like I didn't exist to them. The nurse adjusted the drip and patted my hand. "Rest now. You need your strength." Then she left me in the quiet room. I stared at the ceiling, the truth pressing on me heavier than the oxygen tube. They knew I was dying. They saw me gasping on the floor. And still, they thought the dog's cut paw was more urgent than my life. Something inside me broke that night. I had been ignored before, pushed aside for my brother, silenced when I spoke up. But this was different. This was my life, and they had chosen not to save me. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers. My voice shook as I recorded a message. "You chose the dog over me. Don't worry, I'll never forget." When I was discharged, later that afternoon, the air outside the hospital felt heavy on my skin. I clutched the small bag of medicine they had given me and waited on the curb. I had texted my parents earlier, telling them I was being released, hoping, just hoping, they might pick me up. But no car pulled in. No familiar faces appeared. I finally called a cab. As the driver helped load my bag into the back seat, he asked, "Family couldn't make it." I forced a smile, but inside, the words stung. Family. What did that even mean anymore? When I got home, the first thing I saw was balloons tied to the porch railing. For me? My heart foolishly leapt, but when I stepped closer, my stomach dropped. The balloons had paw prints all over them, and a banner stretched across the door. "Welcome home, Max." Inside, laughter filled the house. My mother and father were clapping as Max, his paw wrapped neatly in gauze, hobbled toward a pile of new toys. My brother filmed on his phone, narrating like it was a national celebration. Not one glance was thrown my way as I stepped through the door. "No, how are you feeling?" "No, we're glad you're alive." "Just cheers for the dog." I stood frozen, my discharge papers crumpling in my hand. "I almost died," I said, my voice louder than I meant. For the first time, the laughter stopped. They turned, blinking at me as though they had forgotten I existed. "You're fine now," my mother said after a pause, brushing me off. "Don't ruin the mood. Max needs positivity." I wanted to scream, to shake them and demand answers. But instead, I pulled out my phone. The voicemail I had left from the hospital glared at me from the screen. I played it back silently, each word a reminder of what I already knew. They had made their choice. A week later, my mother called, her voice sugary sweet. "Emily, come to dinner tonight. We want to celebrate as a family." For a split second, I thought maybe this was it. The apology, the acknowledgement, something human. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That evening, I walked into the dining room, my heart pounding. The table was covered in food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, salad. At first glance, it looked like the kind of family dinner I had always wished for. My father raised a glass. "To Max," he said proudly. My brother grinned and clapped. I froze. Again, it was all about the dog. As plates were passed, laughter bounced around the table. Nobody asked about my health, my hospital stay, or the new medicine I had to carry everywhere. Instead, they went on about how brave Max had been at the vet. He didn't even flinch when they stitched him up, my brother boasted, as if Max had survived a war. Finally, I couldn't hold it in. "Do you even realize I could have died last week?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. The room went silent, forks clinking against plates. "You're exaggerating again," my mother said coldly. "You're young. You'll bounce back." "Stop being dramatic." My father nodded. "Don't spoil dinner with this talk." My brother leaned back smugly. "Emily, it's always about you, isn't it? Just let Max have his moment." I stared at them, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. They were serious. They weren't going to admit anything. Not even now. Something inside me shifted. Quietly, I pressed the record button on my phone, hiding it under the table. As I asked them more questions, their cruel words poured out, one after the other. When my mother finally said, "Max is worth more to us than Emily ever was," the knife twisted deep. And yet, I smiled to myself. This time, I had proof. That night, I sat in my room replaying the recording over and over. Each word cut deeper, but I couldn't stop listening. My mother's voice was clear, her tone sharp with honesty. Max is worth more to us than Emily ever was. No twisting, no excuses. It was all there. I didn't want to face it alone, so I sent the clip to Sarah, My childhood friend. The only person I trusted. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. "Emily, come over now," she texted. When I arrived at her apartment, she pulled me inside, her eyes wide. "I listened to it 3 times. I can't believe they actually said that," she whispered. "This isn't just neglect, Emily. This is abuse." Her words shook me. Abuse. I had always thought I was just less loved, overlooked, maybe unlucky, but abuse. I sat on her couch, my hands trembling. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "They're my parents?" Sarah leaned forward. "No, they're people who treat you worse than they treat a dog. You need to protect yourself." I wanted to argue, to defend them somehow, but the memory of gasping for air while they patched up Max was still burned into my mind. Sarah was right. "You need a plan," she said firmly. "Keep every bit of evidence you can. One day, you'll need it." I nodded slowly, clutching my phone. For the first time, I wasn't just the powerless daughter. I was holding the truth in my hands, and it could not be denied. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "What if the worst is yet to come?" Because something told me this was only the beginning. A few days later, I was in my father's study, looking for a stapler before heading to work. Papers were scattered across his desk, as usual. My eyes drifted to a folder half open marked estate planning. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were official documents, a will, signed and notarized. My father's name filled every page, along with my mother's signature. My eyes raced over the words, my chest tightening as I read. Everything. Our family home, the savings accounts, even the small rental property downtown, was left to my brother, Nathan. At the bottom was one line that made me sit down hard in the chair. Funds to be allocated for the lifelong care of Max, the family dog. Nothing for me. Not one line. Not one mention. I stared at it until the letters blurred. I had been erased. Not by accident. Not by some oversight. Deliberately. My parents had planned a future where even a dog mattered more than their daughter. The door creaked, and I shoved the papers back into the folder just as my father walked in. He eyed me suspiciously. "What are you doing in here?" "Looking for the stapler," I said quickly, holding it up like proof. My heart pounded so loud I thought he could hear it. He muttered something under his breath and brushed past me. I slipped out, my hands clammy, my thoughts racing. That night, I told Sarah. She covered her mouth in shock. "They didn't just neglect you, Emily. They wrote you out of existence." I wanted to scream, cry, demand answers, but I swallowed the storm inside me. Instead, I whispered the thought that had been burning in me since the hospital. If they see me as nothing, then maybe it's time I show them how dangerous nothing can be. The neighborhood barbecue came a week later. My parents insisted I come, as though nothing had happened. "It'll look good if we all show up together," my mother said. I knew what she meant. To everyone outside, we were the perfect family. The park was buzzing with laughter, kids running around, smoke from the grills rising into the warm air. As soon as we arrived, my parents slipped into their roles. My father shook hands. My mother hugged neighbors. And Nathan bragged about Max, who wore a ridiculous bow tie around his neck. "Such a loving family," I overheard Mrs. Langley, our neighbor, say. "You're lucky, Emily." Lucky. The word made my throat tighten. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, anger burned. During dinner, people crowded around, asking about Max's paw. My mother clutched her chest dramatically. "Oh, you wouldn't believe it. We thought we'd lose him that night." She dabbed at her eyes for effect. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Lose him? That was the night I was on the floor, unable to breathe. That was the night I nearly died. Something inside me snapped. I put my fork down and said loudly, "Funny, isn't it? The night Max cut his paw was also the night I almost died from an allergic reaction." The table went silent. Heads turned. My parents stiffened. My father chuckled awkwardly. "Emily has such an imagination. She exaggerates things. She does love attention," my mother added, her smile tight. Heat rushed up my neck. They were rewriting the story right in front of everyone, making me the liar. I excused myself and walked away, my fists clenched. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sarah watching me, her expression filled with anger on my behalf. For the first time, I realized my parents weren't just cruel. They were skilled at pretending, and I was about to stop playing along. It happened late on a Tuesday night. I had ordered takeout after a long shift at work. Halfway through my meal, I felt it, the familiar itch in my throat, the swelling starting at the back of my tongue. My chest tightened, each breath harder than the last. Another allergic reaction. Hands shaking, I grabbed my phone and dialed home. It rang 3 times before my mother answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice distracted. "Mom," I croaked, clutching my throat. "It's happening again. I can't breathe. Please, help." There was a pause, then the sound of Max barking in the background. "Emily, calm down. Nathan's just about to feed Max his dinner. Can't this wait a little?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I can't breathe," I gasped. "Please." My father's voice cut in. "Emily, stop panicking. You're stronger than you think. We'll check on you after Max is settled." The line went dead. I dropped the phone, vision blurring, my body trembling as I fumbled for the emergency injector in my bag. My fingers were weak, clumsy, but somehow I managed to press it against my thigh. The medicine shot through me, and slowly, painfully, my breathing eased. Tears streamed down my face as I curled up on the floor, whispering to myself, "They don't care. They'll never care." Minutes later, a text buzzed on my phone. From my brother. "Sorry, Max freaked out. Hope you're fine. Talk later." That was the moment something inside me broke for good. I wasn't their daughter. I was a burden, an afterthought, less than a pet. And yet, instead of despair, a strange calm filled me. Because I finally knew I could survive without them. But could they survive without me? When the truth came out, 2 days later, I showed up at Sarah's apartment with a single suitcase. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside without a word. I sank onto her couch, exhausted. "I can't go back there," I whispered. Sarah's eyes softened. "Then don't. Stay here as long as you need. You're safe." The word safe made my chest ache. For years, I'd told myself that home was supposed to mean safety, but mine never had. Not once. Over the next few weeks, life with Sarah felt like stepping into a new world. We cooked together, watched silly shows at night, and laughed until our sides hurt. She didn't treat me like a burden or a shadow. She treated me like I mattered. Meanwhile, my parents barely noticed I was gone. Nathan texted twice, once to ask if I'd seen Max's new collar, and another time to send a video of the dog playing fetch. Nothing about me. Nothing about the allergic reaction. Nothing at all? At first, it stung. But then, slowly, it freed me. I wasn't waiting for their call anymore. I wasn't hoping for their approval. I was done. Sarah encouraged me to find a job closer to her place. I started saving. Even opened a small account in my name. Something my parents had never trusted me with. For the first time, my future wasn't tied to their decisions. But late at night, lying awake, I thought about the will, about how my existence had been crossed out with a pen. My parents had erased me on paper. But what if I could flip that script? That thought took root, deep and steady. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning. One Saturday morning, I decided to go back to the house to collect the rest of my things. Sarah offered to come with me, but I told her no. I needed to face it on my own. The house looked the same as always. Perfect lawn, fresh flowers by the porch. Max barking happily in the yard. For a moment, I almost laughed. If someone walked by, they'd think this was a picture-perfect family home. Inside, my parents and Nathan were in the living room. They didn't hear me at first. I froze in the hallway as their voices carried. "Honestly," my mother said, her tone sharp. Emily's dramatic exit was a blessing. She's always been so needy. Now we can focus on Nathan and Max without all her complaints. Nathan chuckled. She probably wanted attention again. "Don't worry. She'll crawl back when she realizes she has nothing." My father added, "We've given her too much already. Let her figure life out. She's made her choice." I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding. They weren't worried. They weren't sad. They were relieved I was gone. I stepped into the doorway, forcing a smile. "Don't stop on my account." They all jumped. My mother's face flushed. "Emily, we didn't know you were here." "Clearly," I said, my voice calm but shaking inside. "I just came for my things." Nathan shifted uncomfortably. My father crossed his arms. My mother tried to smooth it over. "Darling, you misunderstood. We just want what's best for you." I ignored her. I went upstairs, packed my clothes, books, and the little jewelry my grandmother had left me. As I zipped the suitcase, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time, I didn't see the forgotten daughter. I saw someone preparing for something bigger. When I left the house that day, I knew it wasn't just goodbye. It was the beginning of my reckoning. A week later, Sarah insisted I see a doctor to follow up on the allergic reaction. I agreed, even though part of me dreaded reliving it. At the hospital, the doctor reviewed my chart. He looked at me with concern. "Emily, you were minutes away from not making it. The adrenaline saved your life. Without it..." He shook his head. The words landed heavy. Minutes away. I swallowed hard. Flashes of that night filling my mind. The gasping, the panic, the silence on the other end of the phone. When I left his office, I carried a copy of the medical report. It spelled out clearly what had happened. Severe anaphylaxis, life-threatening, immediate intervention required. Cold, clinical words, but they validated everything I had felt. At Sarah's apartment, I spread the papers across the table. Sarah read them, her jaw tightening. They knew. You told them. And they still didn't come. I nodded. My chest ached. But this time not from weakness. From clarity. This is proof. Proof I wasn't exaggerating. Proof. They chose Max over me. Sarah placed her hand over mine. "What are you going to do with it?" I stared at the papers, my mind racing. For years, my parents had controlled the narrative. To everyone else, we were the loving family, the proud parents, the dog lovers. But these pages told another story, one they couldn't twist or laugh off. I folded the report and slipped it into a folder. "I don't know yet," I said quietly. "But when the time comes, they'll see it. Everyone will." That night, lying awake, I realized the truth. My parents had erased me from their will, from their hearts, from their home, but I still had a voice. And I was going to use it. While unpacking the last of my things at Sarah's, I found a small wooden box I had almost forgotten about. It had belonged to my grandmother. She had passed away when I was 12, but before she died, she used to whisper to me, "You're stronger than you think, Emily. Don't ever let them make you feel small." Inside the box were letters, yellowed with age, folded neatly, tied together with a faded ribbon. My hands trembled as I untied it. The first letter was addressed to me. "My dear Emily," it began, "I know the world may not always be kind to you, but remember, you are more than the way others treat you. You are light and you are fire. One day, you will rise above everything that tries to hold you down." Tears blurred my vision. Each letter carried pieces of her wisdom. Stories of how she had endured hardship, how she had fought to carve a place for herself in a world that wanted to silence her. She wrote about dignity, about courage, about never letting anyone decide your worth. I pressed the pages to my chest, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that still lingered. For the first time in weeks, I felt something steady inside me. My grandmother's voice, reaching through time, reminding me that I was not weak. I was not invisible. Sarah walked in and saw me crying. She sat beside me and read one of the letters over my shoulder. "Emily," she said softly. She knew you'd face battles, and she believed you'd win." I wiped my tears and tucked the letters back into the box. My grandmother's words weren't just comfort, they were a call to action. And deep inside, I knew the reckoning I was planning wasn't just for me. It was for her, too. With Sarah's encouragement and my grandmother's words echoing in my heart, I decided it was time to stand on my own. I applied for a job at a small publishing house nearby. They needed an assistant to handle manuscripts and organize events. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. When I got the call saying I'd been hired, I nearly dropped the phone. For the first time, my worth wasn't measured against Nathan or Max. It was measured by my own effort. The days were long, but I didn't mind. I learned quickly, stayed late, and volunteered for tasks no one wanted. My boss noticed. Within months, I was trusted with more responsibilities, editing drafts, coordinating schedules, even speaking to authors. Each step felt like proof that I wasn't invisible, no matter how my family had treated me. Meanwhile, Nathan flooded social media with photos of Max, at the park, vet, even eating dinner from a plate nicer than anything I'd ever used. My parents gushed in the comments, writing paragraphs of love and pride for a dog. For their son, never for me. I stopped checking after a while. I had my own life now, my own tiny apartment, decorated with second-hand furniture and thrift store finds. Sarah still lived nearby, but this space was mine alone. At night, though, the anger crept in. I'd stare at my grandmother's letters, at the hospital report, and think, they erased me. But I'm still here, stronger than they ever imagined. Each success I achieved became fuel, not just for survival, but for something greater. A plan was forming, not cruel, not petty, but undeniable. One day, I'd leave behind more than words. I'd leave a message they could never ignore. Sarah convinced me to come with her to a community fair one evening. I knew my parents might be there, but I felt ready. I wasn't the broken girl who had begged for their attention anymore. Sure enough, I spotted them across the square. My parents with Nathan, and, of course, Max trotting proudly beside them. People stopped to pet the dog, complimenting Nathan. My parents glowed as if they were royalty. I might have slipped away unnoticed, but then I heard my father's booming voice. "We've set everything in order now. Nathan will inherit the house, the savings, everything." We had to make tough choices, but Emily never really fit into the family's future. A woman gasped, "But she's your daughter." My mother chuckled lightly, waving her hand as though brushing away an inconvenience. "Emily's fine. She's independent now." Honestly, she was always too fragile. This way, Nathan doesn't have to worry, and Max will be cared for. Laughter followed. Laughter. At my expense. I stood frozen behind the booth, the words slicing deeper than any wound. Not only had they erased me from their will, but they were proud of it. They paraded it like an achievement. I left quickly, Sarah rushing after me. She saw my face and didn't need to ask what had happened. That night, lying awake in my small apartment, the humiliation burned hotter than the anger. My parents weren't just blind. They wanted the world to see me as worthless. But my grandmother's words echoed. "You will rise above everything that tries to hold you down." And, as I stared at the ceiling, I knew my reckoning wouldn't just be about revenge. It would be about truth. About making sure the world finally saw them for who they were. The next morning, I sat at my small desk and opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote one word in bold letters: truth. I started with the hospital report. I copied down every detail: severe anaphylaxis, near fatal, lack of immediate intervention. Then I wrote about that night, the call that went unanswered, the sound of Max barking in the background while I begged for help. Next, I described the fair, my father's words, my mother's laugh, the way they treated me like a burden erased from their future. I wrote it exactly as I had heard it, word for word. As the days passed, the notebook grew thicker. I filled it with memories, times I had been pushed aside, silenced or ignored while Nathan and Max were celebrated. It wasn't just about venting. It was a record, undeniable and precise. I also gathered physical proof. I kept copies of the medical papers, screenshots of their posts praising Max, even receipts showing the thousands they spent on him while I was left to scrape by. Piece by piece, I built a picture no one could deny. Sarah noticed one evening as I spread the papers across my table. "This isn't just anger anymore," she said softly. I nodded. "It's a message. One day, when they can't twist it, they'll have to see who they really are." She didn't argue. She just placed a hand on mine, steady and warm. For the first time, the anger didn't feel like poison. It felt like fuel. Every page I filled made me stronger, calmer, more certain. My reckoning wasn't about destroying them. It was about shining a light so bright they couldn't hide anymore. And I knew, when the time was right, I'd deliver it in a way no one could ignore. Work at the publishing house was going well. I had been shortlisted to assist with a new project, helping a best-selling author prepare for a book tour. It was the kind of opportunity that could move my career forward in a huge way. But then, without warning, the offer was pulled. My boss seemed uncomfortable when I asked why. The author felt unsure, she said vaguely. There were concerns about professionalism. The word stung. I had worked tirelessly to prove myself. What concerns could there possibly be? A week later, the truth slipped out during a coffee break. One of my colleagues leaned closer and whispered, "Emily, I probably shouldn't say this, but..." Nathan called the office. He said, "You were unstable, that you had health issues, and, well, that you'd abandoned the family." My heart slammed against my ribs. Nathan! He had interfered again, this time reaching into the life I had built for myself. I could almost hear his smug voice telling my parents later, "Don't worry, I handled it." I walked home in a haze of fury. How many times had they done this behind my back? Sabotaging me, painting me as weak, unreliable, broken. How many opportunities had slipped away because of their whispers? That night, I added another entry to my notebook. I wrote down everything I'd learned about the sabotage, marking it carefully with the date and details. The betrayal didn't crush me this time. It sharpened me. They wanted me small, powerless, invisible. But every act of cruelty only gave me more material, more proof, more fire. I looked at my growing pile of evidence spread across the table and whispered, "You won't silence me. Not anymore." Because the message I was preparing wasn't just for them. It was for everyone who had ever believed their lies. I stared at the notebook one evening, its pages swollen with memories, quotes, and evidence. It no longer felt like just a record. It was a story. My story. And if told right, it could strip away every mask my parents and Nathan wore. I bought a small voice recorder and began speaking the entries aloud. At first, my voice shook. My parents chose a dog over my life. This is what happened. But with each recording, my words grew steadier. Speaking them made the pain real, but it also made me stronger. I organized the chapters like a book, starting with the night of my allergic attack, then layering in their dismissals, the fair, Nathan's sabotage. Each section ended with a question that made listeners lean forward. What kind of family does this? Sarah listened to a draft one afternoon. Her eyes glistened when I finished. "Emily, this isn't just a message. It's powerful. People will feel this. They'll know the truth." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had been dismissed, silenced, overlooked. But now, my voice, simple, trembling, raw, had the power to make others see. I started saving the files under one name, The Message. At night, I'd imagine the day it would be released, not to shame them with cruelty, but to reveal them, to show the world how a family could choose pride, appearance, and even a dog over their own daughter. Each recording felt like lifting a weight off my chest. The anger was still there, but it wasn't eating me anymore. It was becoming something sharper, cleaner, more undeniable. I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing, and deep down, I knew. The right moment to release the message was coming sooner than I thought. The invitation came through a distant cousin. A family gathering, supposedly to celebrate my father's retirement. At first, I thought about ignoring it. But Sarah looked at me and said, "Maybe this is the moment. Maybe you need to see them one last time before you decide." So I went. The hall was full of relatives, chatter, and the smell of catered food. I stayed near the back, unnoticed at first. Then I heard it. My name, spoken loudly over the microphone. My father stood at the podium, grinning as he gestured toward Nathan. "This is the son who has carried our family's honor, the one who stayed loyal, the one who never turned his back on us. The crowd clapped, and my chest tightened. I knew what was coming before he said it. And then there's Emily. A pause, followed by a thin smile. She has chosen her own path, far away from her family. We wish her well, of course, but she's no longer part of the legacy we're building. Laughter rippled across the room, as if my life had been reduced to a joke. Even my mother, in her fine silk dress, nodded in agreement. The final blow came when Nathan brought Max onto the stage. The dog wore a shiny medal around his neck. "Our real treasure," my mother announced proudly. "The one who kept this family together." Applause filled the hall. My face burned hot, and I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me, some with pity, some with amusement. But instead of collapsing, I stood taller. I memorized every sneer, every laugh, every careless word, because this was it. The proof, the humiliation, the cruelty on display for everyone to see. I slipped out quietly, heart pounding, and whispered to myself, "The message will speak louder than they ever imagined." The night of the retirement party played in my head like a broken record. Their laughter, the medal around Max's neck, my father's words. "She's no longer part of the legacy we're building." I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my desk with my notebook, my recorder, and my laptop. The pages of scribbled memories now felt like weapons of truth, and I knew it was time to sharpen them. I started rewriting my story. Clean, clear, undeniable. I kept the details simple, grade school plain, so no one could twist them. My parents chose a dog over my life. When I almost died, they locked me out. When I begged for help, they laughed. When I tried to move forward, they tore me down. Each line felt like a knife, carving away the silence they had forced on me. I added photos where I could. The hospital wristband from my allergy attack. Messages from Nathan, mocking me. Receipts of the night I left home with nothing but a small bag. Proof that this wasn't just bitterness. It was truth. Then I re-recorded everything. My voice was steady now. Firm. Not begging for pity, but demanding to be heard. Each chapter built on the next, carrying listeners through years of neglect, humiliation, and erasure. I gave the files one name. Final message. Sarah sat beside me, her hand on mine as I saved the last recording. "Are you really going to send it?" she asked softly. "Yes," I whispered. "But not yet. They'll hear it when they least expect it." Because revenge wasn't about screaming in their faces anymore. It was about timing, precision, and making sure every word landed exactly where it needed to. For the first time, I felt in control, not of them, but of my own story. And that was the most powerful shift of all. I spent the next few days in silence, but it wasn't the silence of defeat anymore. It was the silence of planning. Every move had to be exact. If I released the final message too soon, they would dismiss it as drama. If I waited too long, the fire inside me might fade. Then the opportunity came without me forcing it. An email from my aunt popped into my inbox. A family reunion in 2 weeks. Everyone would be there. Old friends, distant cousins, business partners. My parents loved these reunions. They treated them like showcases of their perfect family image. The thought hit me hard. That's when I'll do it. Instead of sending it to them directly, I began arranging something bigger. I uploaded the recordings to a private folder online, securing them with a timed release link. I drafted a short note that would accompany it. "This is my truth. My family chose a dog over my life. For years, I was erased. Here is the evidence. Let the world decide. I scheduled the message to go out to every relative's inbox, every family friend, even my parents' closest colleagues. Timed exactly for the evening of the reunion. Sarah watched me click the final schedule button. "Emily," she said, "once you do this, there's no going back." I nodded. That's the point. They've controlled the story for too long. Now, the story controls them. For the first time in years, I felt no fear, only clarity. I pictured the scene. My parents smiling at the reunion, Nathan by their side, Max probably paraded around like royalty, when suddenly, phones would buzz, emails would open, and the final message would explode into the room like thunder. That was the justice I had been waiting for. The reunion hall was dressed like a royal banquet. Golden lights hung from the ceiling, tables lined with food, and laughter spilling from every corner. My parents moved through the crowd like celebrities, shaking hands, smiling for photos. Nathan strutted beside them, Max on a shiny leash with a ribbon tied around his neck. I stayed far back, tucked near the entrance. Sarah was with me, her hand steady on my arm. "Are you ready?" she whispered. My chest felt tight, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. I had already set the timer. At exactly 7:15 p.m., every single inbox would receive the final message. All I had to do was wait. I watched my father raise a glass of wine, clearing his throat for attention. Tonight, we celebrate family, the strength of loyalty, the power of unity. His words carried through the speakers, smooth as silk. My mother nodded proudly, placing her hand on Nathan's shoulder. 7:14. My palms began to sweat. I glanced at Sarah. She gave me the smallest nod. 7:15. It started slowly. A buzz here, a vibration there. People glanced at their phones under the table, frowns spreading across their faces. Then a murmur, then whispers. Screens lit up everywhere, illuminating the hall like fireflies. And then the silence, the kind of silence that cuts. My father faltered mid-sentence. My mother's smile froze. Nathan leaned over someone's shoulder, eyes widening, as he read the words out loud. "My parents chose a dog over my life." Heads turned. Eyes shifted. Gasps echoed. And then, someone hit play. My voice filled the speakers of a phone, raw and steady, telling the story of neglect, cruelty, and the night they locked me out while I begged for air. The room wasn't clapping anymore. It was listening, and my parents were trapped in the spotlight, not by their choice, but by mine. At first, no one dared to speak. Just my voice carried through the hall, clear as glass. I heard myself describing the night of the allergy attack, the door slamming, in my face, my parents' laughter echoing as my throat closed. The same words I had once begged them to hear were now echoing to an audience they couldn't silence. Then the questions started. "Is this true?" my aunt demanded, her eyes wide with shock. She turned to my mother, who froze, clutching her wine glass so tightly I thought it would shatter. "It's just exaggeration," my father tried to insist, his voice shaky. "You know how dramatic Emily can be." But another cousin stood up, holding his phone high. "There are pictures. Look, hospital wristbands, messages from Nathan. This isn't made up." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother's face flushed red. Nathan's jaw clenched, his eyes burning holes through me from across the room. I didn't move. I didn't have to. One by one, Relatives pressed them harder. How could you choose a dog over your own daughter? Why would you parade Max like a trophy while ignoring her pain? What kind of parents do that? The whispers turned into a storm. My parents, who once commanded every room they walked into, suddenly looked small, cornered, like liars whose mask had been ripped away. Max barked once, the sound sharp in the tense silence. People's heads turned toward him, then back at my father, as if the dog himself was proof of their twisted priorities. Finally, someone said what everyone else was thinking. "You don't deserve her." The words cut through the air like a blade. My father's mouth opened, then closed. My mother's hands trembled. Nathan glared at me, but I didn't flinch. Because, for once, it wasn't me standing trial. It was them. The silence after that accusation lingered, thick and heavy. My parents stood at the center of the storm, stripped of their usual armor of charm and control. Their faces were pale, their smiles gone. And then every head in the room turned toward me. I felt it. The shift. The spotlight that had once been their crown now burned on my shoulders. Sarah's hand tightened around mine. "This is your moment," she whispered. I walked forward, slowly, each step echoing against the polished floor. My parents' eyes widened, as though they had seen a ghost. For years, they had worked so hard to erase me from family gatherings, to make me invisible. And yet, here I was, undeniable. I stopped just a few feet away from them. "All I ever wanted," I said, my voice steady, "was to be loved, to be seen as your daughter. But instead, you chose him." I pointed at Nathan, who scowled, "and his dog over me. You locked me out when I couldn't breathe. You let me suffer, just so your image wouldn't crack." Gasps filled the room again, but I didn't stop. My voice grew firmer. "Tonight, everyone knows the truth. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your apologies. I just need you to live with what you've done." My father's lips parted, but no words came. My mother whispered, "Emily, please." But even she sounded unsure, like her lines had been stolen from her. Nathan stepped forward, anger flashing. "You think this makes you strong? You think humiliating us fixes anything?" I met his glare without flinching. "No," I said calmly, "but it sets me free." The room erupted again. Whispers, murmurs, judgment heavy in the air. My parents stood frozen, their empire of lies crumbling around them. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the weak one. I was the one holding the power. The hall buzzed with voices, sharp and rising. Relatives whispered behind their hands. Others stared openly at my parents, like strangers, seeing them for the first time. My father's face tightened, his jaw grinding as though he could crush my words by sheer force. My mother's mascara smudged as tears threatened to fall, though I couldn't tell if they were from shame or anger. Nathan, however, was not one to crumble. He stepped closer, his voice raised above the noise. "You're pathetic, Emily. All this just to get attention. You've always been jealous of me. Admit it, you can't stand that they loved me more." The crowd gasped, but I only shook my head. "Listen to yourself. You've just confirmed everything I said." Laughter, not mine, but from somewhere in the crowd, broke out, short and bitter. "He actually admitted it," someone muttered. Another voice said, "They never even denied choosing the dog." My father's patience snapped. He slammed his glass down on the table so hard it shattered, wine spilling like blood across the white cloth. "Enough!" he bellowed. You've humiliated us long enough, Emily. This ends now. But the room didn't quiet. If anything, it grew louder. Relatives shouting, questioning, judging. My parents, once the centerpiece of respect, were now cornered animals under a spotlight they couldn't escape. I held my ground. No, Dad. This doesn't end now. This ends when you face what you've done. When you admit that I almost died while you chose a dog. When you stop pretending to be perfect. For a moment, the mask cracked. His hand shook as he pointed at me, his voice low and venomous. You'll regret this. But it was too late. The room wasn't his anymore. The family was no longer clapping for him. They were watching me. The hall had reached a fever pitch, voices colliding like waves in a storm. My father's threat still lingered in the air, but I didn't flinch. I raised my chin, steady and calm, and let the silence fall back into my hands. I'm not here for revenge, I said, my voice carrying through the room. I'm here so no one else has to live the lie I lived, so no one else believes they're worthless because their own parents decided a pet deserved more love than their child. The words settled like stones in water, rippling outward. Some people bowed their heads, ashamed. Others glared at my parents with open disgust. My mother's shoulders sagged, her eyes darting from face to face, searching desperately for someone to defend her. But no one did. I took a breath and reached into my pocket. My phone was still recording. I lifted it so they all could see. This message isn't just for tonight. It's for the world. For every kid who ever felt unseen, unheard, unloved. I want them to know, you are not the problem. The people who refuse to see your worth are. Nathan's face twisted in rage, but he said nothing. Max barked again, the sound cutting through the silence, almost mocking. I met my parents' eyes one last time. This is my goodbye. I'm not part of this family anymore, but my story will live on, and you'll live with the truth you tried so hard to bury. I turned, walking out with Sarah by my side. Behind me, the hall erupted again. Chaos, shouts, judgment raining down on the parents who had once been untouchable. But I didn't look back. For the first time in years, my chest felt light. The weight of silence was gone. My message had been heard. And I was finally free.